Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
with your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is J.S. Absher.
So sit back,
Pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
Welcome to Books and Brews, episode number 60, with our guest, J.S. Absher. Laura, what's been going on in your month?
Well, it's been interesting. We've had twin lambs. We found out that of our 7 hens and 1 rooster, we've got at least 2 roosters and no more than 6 hens. And that's very bad news for the hens. So not great news for us either, because we're going to have to figure out what to do with those. And I thought I would show the audience this wonderful, we got our 3D printer set up. And so we have a wonderful book stand now that Chris made. And how about you?
Well, I've been putting together a 3D printer. And also would like to highlight that 10 years ago on Sunday was the first time we met at the Astor Cafe in person in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on the banks of the Mississippi River. And what a wonderful 10 years it's been since then.
It has been. What have you read?
Well, I have read one book, which is a very interesting book written by Saint Isidore in about the year 635 or so. So we go back in the history of the Catholic Church quite a long ways. And it's his book, which is abbreviated DEO, and is essentially talks about all of the aspects of the Mass and the canon of the Church in that time in what was Spain in the Iberian Peninsula, which was a very interesting part of church history as well. So it was a very interesting book. How about yourself?
I've gotten through about the first 10, 12 pages of It's About Time by David W. Allen, and the subtitle is Science Harmonized with Religion. And this is a fascinating man. He worked on the atomic clocks for, I think, about 30, 35 years. And he does talk in his introduction, his preface, about the fact that he's a man of faith. And in fact, he belongs to the LDS Church, like our guest today does, and discusses how we fit faith and science together, which I think is very interesting, because today people tend to think that they're separate and, in fact, in opposition to each other. But a lot of the early scientists, in fact, were priests. So I'm looking forward to getting into that.
And what you're saying is, after only reading 10 or 12 pages, that you perhaps need more time.
Yeah, I need more time because, I'm out chasing lambs in the field, trying to take care of them when they're brand new.
So speaking of our guest, who is our guest today, Laura?
Well, I am looking forward to talking with Stan. He goes by J.S. Absher. He is a poet, memoirist, and independent scholar. As a teetotaler, he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He can't add much insight to Brews, but he can hold his own when it comes to books. Stan's first full-length book of poetry, Mouthwork, won the 2015 Lena Shull Award from the North Carolina Poetry Society. His second full-length book, Skating Rough Ground, was published in 2022. Absher lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with his wife, Patty. His work in poetry and prose can be followed at www.jsabsherpoetry.com. So welcome to Books and Brews, Stan, and we are ready for cocktail number 1.
So we're shifting gears a bit here on the Books and Brews podcast. We've done it once already by shifting from beers to cocktails. And I thought with the wonderful spring weather, we could also shift gears again away from alcoholic cocktails to non-alcoholic cocktails, honoring the spring, the wonderful availability of fruit and, wonderful sparkling waters and things like that. So today we have 3 non-alcoholic cocktails. And the first cocktail is a Brazilian limeade, which is basically a wonderful spring-like cocktail. We start with a blender, we zest and juice 5 limes, and then we take the contents of that with some sweetened condensed milk, a little bit of simple syrup, and we pop that in the blender. And this is what we end up with, this wonderful looking concoction, which we will then pour into the glasses. And really, as with any non-alcoholic cocktail, you can make an alcoholic version of this with rum if you wanted. But today, we are sticking without that, and we'll have a nice spring-like beverage here. Now, the interesting thing is, with a lot of zest from the lime peel, you can actually, the longer this drink sits, the more bitter it can become. So with the zest, we like to make sure that there's only enough in the blender to give this a nice bouquet of flavor rather than a very bitter lime, oriented or sour. Very good. Here's our Brazilian limeade for spring. Cheers.
And my lime fell off.
Well,
do we have
fortunately,
a spare?
I have an emergency backup lime.
One should always have a backup emergency line.
And cheers to
Thank
that.
goodness. That is really, really nice.
Doesn't that have a nice?
Yeah, it's a very mild flavor, milder than
Mhm.
I would have expected. And it almost tastes, whoops, I'm spilling everything. It almost tastes like a little bit of a milkshake or a smoothie. It's got a really nice flavor.
I agree that fresh lime juice with the zest really gives it a nice floral kind of a bouquet with the lime rather than a heavy duty, artificial flavor that you might find in some bar drinks where they use, processed lime juice or something like that.
Are there, did you say there are eggs in there at all, or?
No, as a matter of fact, there are not. But it is interesting because I do like to do a dry shake with many of the cocktails, as Laura and our audience will know. And that's where we take some fresh egg whites into a shaker and we shake them on up until you get a nice white egg foam. And you could put that on top of this particular drink to give it a wonderful, nice little lightness to it. The egg white also provides a little bit of sweetness, which would help with the lime flavor as well.
So why did you choose the Brazilian limeade?
Well, with the first two poems, as part of our first reading, it was a little hard to come up with an inspiration for a cocktail. They are very serious subjects. But I was taken by the poem Remembering Clara, in that she was very oriented to church, and that was a very important aspect of her life. And of course, being in the Midwest, coming from the Midwest, many churches have church suppers, and green jello or lime jello is a huge feature of cuisine at any Midwestern church. And so I had this idea in my mind of doing something with lime without getting into the controversy of whether you put pears in the lime jello or not. I stuck purely with lime juice.
That is a big controversy. You don't want to get people angry about that.
Yes. With our 8 point, how many million now?
I think we're up to 8.89.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, so Stan, we're ready for reading number 1. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be on your show. So my first reading is a couple poems inspired by the people in my current life or in my recent life. In fact, both of them reflect that I'm at that time of life where every month at least someone I know related to is terminal or gets a serious illness, and it's kind of inescapable. So these poems reflect that. The Pear Tree. Pity there was no ceremony for the lobe of lung they took. The teeth all pulled, the hip replaced, the colon halved by increments, the ulcer cut from his foot. No ceremony for any of them. Before the last ride to the ER on the day he is losing his home, let us praise the missing pieces, curse the cocaine kicked too late, the diabetes, the cigarettes never kicked. Praise the surgeon who said, "You ought to have died many times by now," a saying he wears like a medal. And perhaps that's the missing ceremony for the missing parts. They ought to have killed him. One of the many heart attacks ought to have killed him. And something will, as it will me and you, dear reader, without ceremony. Like the man I saw once who climbed to the top of a Bradford pear and cut it down, limb by limb as he descended. I was glad to see it gone, but a little shocked at how casually it came down. First tree, then stump, then level ground. Yeah, the next one is Remembering Clara, that the mocktail is based on. My wife and I took her to church for a few years before COVID, and we occasionally drop by her house, visit, and she liked my poems. So a plus for Clara.
Yes.
Remembering Clara. She sang in church and in college halls full of vibrato. After she died, whoever recalled her youth smiled to hear again her singing tremolo inside their heads. She spoke in vibrato too, a quaver, timid, and stubborn. Left home less and less, and after the pandemic, never. Her doctor died, but no one thought to tell. Sick, she dithered. Then it was too late. What she most wanted, what she most feared, was happening. The cancer was too far gone, and she was going. Mostly she slept, was sleeping the one time we visited. Our cards were under her pillow, they said. She was going to read them all, but the current ran too fast and rough. Painkillers smoothed it out. The child's ride at the water park. She gave herself to it. I won't try to grab the sides. A deep, soft pool is waiting, and my Charles waits with a warm, thick towel to dry me off.
I loved that ending. I thought that was just a really beautiful vision of the afterlife
Yeah.
that's waiting for us, and seeing something good in it. But it actually, just as you read it this time, made me think of my grandmother's funeral.
Mm.
And so when she died back in the 80s, 90s, whatever it was, the priest, I think he was Vietnamese. He was not very tall. And he was so excited, like he was practically turning cartwheels. And I'm like, this is a funeral. We're supposed to be miserable. We're supposed to be sad. And in his homily, he's like, well, if we really believe in the afterlife in heaven, why would we be sad? You know, if
Yeah,
someone's
yeah.
lived a good life. And that was a really profound, kind of life-changing moment for me. Like, yeah, he's right. Why are we sad? But your poem just reminded me of that. So that was kind of neat.
Oh, thanks.
So he based his cocktail on Clara. My first question or comment is about the tree. And I think that you did a really neat job. And it only hit me like the second or third time I read the poem. The first time I'm like, why are we talking about a tree in the middle of talking about people falling apart? And then, you know, second, third time I read it, I was like, oh, that's obvious. And I think that's a really part of what makes a poem good, is to have that subtle way of giving this insight, this wisdom, this image of the tree coming down limb by limb. And that's kind of how we're going to go out, most of
Right.
us. You know, if we're lucky enough to live to old age. What do you think makes a good poem?
Oh, gracious. That's not the question I was
Sorry to put
expecting.
you on the spot.
All right. Well, all right. So
Yeah.
let me say that the poem I enjoy writing or reading is the one that engages a broad, I mean, there are exceptions, obviously short poems, but generally speaking, poems that engage a broad sense of the senses broadly,
Mhm.
the five senses and balance, and, you know, all the other senses we can think of. Those that engage a sense of time in some way,
Okay.
including, so I write a fair number of historical poems, but even, I mean, to me, Clara, I mean, it engages time, his history, but our life and time, you know, that we're mortal and we pass through time. And then broadly, again, not every poem does this or can do all of this, but things that are engaging theologically or philosophically, or and not necessarily using abstract terms that make you think, ah, yes, objective versus subjective, but rather in the working out of the poem, if you're really paying attention, either as a writer or a reader, those things come. Those things are present. And more, one of the things, again, I'm not sure this not actually answering your question, but one of the things about a poem I like to read or write is those that engage in figuring out how to explain in spiritual terms the horrible life that we live in. I mean, obviously my life isn't horrible. But you know what I mean? The
Well, it's
death
the
and
fallen world. There's a
yeah,
lot of
death and disease
unhappiness
and
in
all the
life.
terrible
Yeah,
things we see
right.
happening around the world. How do we see God in history in that context
Mhm.
without sliding those actual things that are happening and pretending they're not there? And I don't think I've ever written a poem that actually did all those things, but that's kind of
Mhm.
what the things I like to see. And
Right, right.
and all that in interesting language.
Right. And I
Yeah,
think poetry reaches people sometimes in a way that prose doesn't.
yeah.
Have you had formal training in poetry or just kind of learn as you go?
Well, I did take as an I got a 3 degrees in English lit, but not in creative writing. But
Okay.
I did take a couple courses, and one was kind of a tutorial as an undergrad in writing poetry. And then once my son was old enough that I could leave him at home, I was a single parent. We alternated days. You know, we took turns days and
Mhm.
weekends. So once I got to a point I could get away for an evening class, I took a continuing ed class at Duke University. Duke's in Durham, North Carolina. So it was a night course for adults, although some younger people took it too. Wonderful instructor, wonderful students. And there I got to figure out how to do all the things I want to do in a poem
Mhm.
and people understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because
I think you do a great job.
I had this terrible problem, a great idea, and the language might be interesting, but people just think it was like a long riddle and couldn't make heads or tails of it, right?
You know, I would like to be submitting my poetry and really putting my work out there more. And I realized very quickly it's a lot of work apart from writing the poems themselves. What all is involved in it, and how do you keep track of all of that?
Right, right, right. It is. I have and I know people have more sophisticated ways of doing it, but I have a list of, and just in Word, it's a long, big word table. The poems I think might be worthwhile being sent out.
Mhm.
And I'm behind because I've written a lot in the last 2 or 3 months and I haven't put them all in there. But I tend to put them in when I actually send them out. And then once I send them out and they're rejected, they're there in the list. And that way I can keep track of. In the olden days, it was like you were anathema if you submitted to 2 places at the same time. But that's pretty
Right.
much that's accepted in most places now. So that's not a big deal. And then the other, so that's how I kind of keep track of poor things. And then I have another list in a simpler word table, poems that have been accepted and where and when, and if there was any payment involved. And when I remember, I
Mhm.
put the URL. I don't always remember to do that.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of where to send, that took a while to figure out. In the olden days, pre-internet, it was hard because you actually had to go to a library that had poetry magazines and read them.
Do you remember the big book, The Writer's Guide to
Oh yes,
Submissions?
I bought that several years,
I
but I never
that
found
was
that
my
very.
Christmas gift one year in high school. My parents got me that, but you had to get that every year,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
weren't cheap.
they weren't cheap, and I didn't really find them all that useful myself.
I don't think I got any real benefit out of it, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
but so now I'm familiar with the number of places. I've been writing long enough, so there are 2 or 3 places I've had not 100% success, but consistent success in getting
yeah,
published.
I'm
Um,
I'm guessing nobody has 100%. I
I
mean,
wouldn't. No,
you know,
I wouldn't think so. And then I
right.
start saying, well, poems I like. You know, I see a book and I read a poem I like, and I look where it was published.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, you know, and then I might go look it up and see is that the kind of place that might publish me. So I've
Right.
made I've done some publications that way.
You
Right.
have a lot of travel in your background. You have some interesting stays in various countries. Can you tell us a little about that?
Oh, well, I was a Latter-day Saint missionary in Paris,
Mhm.
in France, not Paris, but in France for 2 years. And I did get a few interesting poems out of that. Some of them I didn't really finish till 30, 40 years after my mission. Um,
Mhm.
so I was there for a couple of years, and that's where I really learned to love French, the culture and the language and the poetry. And I've translated some French poetry, primarily the
Oh,
French poet.
fantastic.
He's actually a German poet, Rilke, but at the end of his career, he wrote in French, very subtle poems that are really interesting and super hard to translate. So I've done a handful of those. My latest thing is not poetry. It's a book in French, an eyewitness account of the genocide in Rwanda by an eyewitness, and he was a kid at the time. So I've
Okay.
translated the first chapter, and I hope to do all that, just not to get it published, just for my own
Okay.
benefit.
That's fantastic. And you've been
Yeah.
to Taiwan and Belize?
Yeah, been to Taiwan and Belize, taught a course in English ballad in Belize for 2 weeks.
That is amazing. A friend of mine wrote a book. His great uncle was a missionary priest in Belize. And a book was actually written about his great uncle by the Jesuits. I think he was a Jesuit. And the family had the last remaining copies, so he republished that. And it's kind of a neat story, you know. It's
That's nice. Yeah.
a little, yeah, it's a little bit of a Crocodile Dundee, you know, going through the jungle fighting alligators or crocodiles or whatever on the way to baptize babies. And it's a neat story. But I think we need to move on to cocktail number 2.
Very good.
All right.
So the second drink is called the Marigold, and I was inspired by the treatment of marigolds in our second reading today, which just sounded, you know, it was kind of a neat and poignant reference, and I thought I was a bit, you know, inspired by that. The Marigold is a cocktail that has a number of very fiery ingredients. With the Marigold, we have a couple of small glasses here, and what we're first going to do is mix in, or pour, a few ounces of orange juice. Then the wonderful complement to orange juice that we see in a number of cocktails, grenadine, which will give it a little bit of a tequila sunrise, I think, type of a color. And then what we use is, because we're making a non-alcoholic version of this cocktail, we're going to use some sparkling water, which in this case is kind of a bit of an orange mango. If we were making an alcoholic version, we would actually use something like Prosecco or champagne in order to provide the bit of sparkle in it. And so now I will kind of stir this up a little bit. And as you can see, it has taken on a little bit of the cast of a marigold flower. And I'll cool it off with a couple of ice cubes. Here is the Marigold cocktail for our second reading. Cheers.
What do you think?
I like it. It has that nice little sparkle, you know, that you get from the use of the sparkling water. Very fruity and floral. And I like a little bit of the sweetness of the grenadine that's in there. What do you think?
I think this would be really nice on a really hot day, especially after you've, it's like the cocktail equivalent of Michael's lawnmower beer.
Beers. Yes.
So I think in the right circumstance, I would like it a lot. It's a little bit fizzy for me, a little bit, on the right day, I'd like it a lot. I'll leave it at that.
Very good.
Reading number 2.
Okay, I'm from the Upper South, and my parents are both from the northwest corner of North Carolina. They were, in fact, cousins. They were cousins 2 or 3 different ways, actually. So, you know, we're a deeply inbred bunch of people.
You seem to have done okay, though.
But anyway, so and my dad had a traumatic life as a child, as an adult. So a lot of my poems are about childhood, his or mine, or family history. This is one of those poems. It's one of my better received poems, actually. What I Knew and When. And there's kind of a repeated words out of a song, Sail Away Ladies, which Uncle Dave Macon performed back in the probably 30s or 40s. And my dad's Uncle Frank supposedly is humming or singing the song in the course of the poem.
This isn't your Uncle Frank, it's your father's Uncle Frank.
My great Uncle Frank, right? Yeah, but my dad's Uncle Frank, right? And this is in my father's voice, based on true stories, but a lot of fiction mixed in. What I Knew and When. As I'm writing this down, my Uncle Frank is in my head singing a tune. He stamps his feet and bellows out the chorus. Don't she rock, Daddy-O? Don't she rock? I remember when I was almost 16, sitting in the locked shed behind Dancy's store, cornered between my uncle and John Stutz. Don't she rock, Uncle sang under his breath. Sail away, ladies. We were playing no limit 5-card stud. I had one eye on Stutz, easy to pull a knife, the other on Ruth Baldwin and the gun in his belt. When Stutz went broke, he looked around the table for a loan. Hell no, said the men. But I passed him a 20. He won 100 quick, but wouldn't pay me back. He was half blind with hooch, so from his stack I lifted $40. When he lost a hand, he missed the 220s. Sell away, hummed Uncle Frank, and came out with his knife, lunging at Baldwin. Baldwin dodged and drew his 38. You'll be an angel by and by. But I grabbed his shooting hand. The shot went wide. God says nothing happens that is not planned. I was holding the gun when Daddy pushed in, snatched the 38, and knocked me flat. I sat in the dirt, stuttering. Another hand? Asked Uncle Frank. Children, don't you grieve and cry. So I took the bus to Biloxi. In the depot, I met a girl on the run. At her request, bought tickets to go all the way to Billings. Said she'd make it worth my dime, sail away, through Memphis and St. Louis, Des Moines and Sioux City, Sioux Falls and Pear. I saw how the world looks through the haze of windblown hair and a bus's dirty window as cornfields vanish in blue diesel smoke. Who are you? She asked. I'm the surefire double action engine, so come along, girl, and go with me. Let's go live in Tennessee. She said she wanted a girl and 2 boys, a car that runs, a garden with a bed of marigolds, a clothesline bright with sheets. Her daddy found us in the rooming house. Get out, son, he said, cocking his 44. The girl turned red. I cried and ran. I love my Nancy, but it ain't no use. From Billings, I rode my thumb to Colorado, where peaks of white, cold teeth were grinning all around. Everything's always been about something else, and damned if I could ever figure it out. I drank for days and hopped a freight for home. South of Cincinnati, the honeysuckle made me think about the girl I'd lost. So who are you? She asked me on the bus. I don't know, I should have said. I never knew.
Yes, this is from your book called Mouthwork.
Yep,
Why?
yep. But by chance, totally, utterly random
Fantastic.
chance, I have a copy here.
Oh, that's skating rough ground. Do
Oh,
you have
you're right.
Mouthwork
Gosh.
too?
Oh. So here we go. I can read now. So Mouthwork.
Oh,
And that's
neat.
so that's my grandfather Albert, the one that rushes into the room and thinks that my dad was the one that shot. So that's my dad right here. He's kind of
Yeah.
he's the one right there, and he's scowling at the camera.
Okay. Which one over is he? Starting from your uncle's right hand or great uncle?
The great uncle's not here. That's my grandfather.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's Albert, the one. This is my father right here.
Oh, right there. Okay.
Right,
So the
right.
one holding his left hand.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that's his older brother, the one that's holding his hand. And
That's really neat having the family photograph on the
Yeah.
cover.
And I've studied that photograph a lot, and I'm thinking my uncle, my dad's older brother, is holding him so he won't leave the frame of the picture while it's being taken, which I think is why my father is scowling at the camera, because he doesn't want any part of it, but he's being held in captivity. And I don't know if you can tell
That's
on the
funny.
screen, but behind my dad's head is the sheep, the back of a sheep.
Okay, I cannot see that. I'll
Yeah,
have to look closer.
Yeah, you could, on the photograph I sent you should be able to see it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
will. So why mouth work? What is the meaning of that?
Well, that's what poetry is. So
Okay.
the poem where I talk about that is about beavers working with.
Mhm.
They use their mouths and their claws, of course, but it's a lot of it is they cut with their teeth and they carry the wood with their teeth. So it's mouth
Mhm.
work, right? And to me, that was an equivalent. Poetry is mouth work.
Okay, that's
so-
I didn't know if it pertained in some way to your father. Is the whole book about your father?
No, it's not. Let's see. The first section is family history, really.
Okay.
Well, there's kind of an introductory section, and that includes a poem about the beaver, 2 ways of damming the Eno. And then the next one has some family poems in it. Then the next one has kind of historical and mythical poems. And the third one is more my life or nature poems, but a
Okay.
mixture.
Okay.
But one of those does have one of those poems is a family history poem too. So it's kind of a mixture, but it isn't just family. But that was, to me, that's the heart of the book, the heart of the reason the
Okay.
poems,
Is
the
about
heart,
family.
right. So
The-
one of
Well, the connotation of mouthwork that kind of came to my mind, especially based upon your upbringing and the family orientation, is the fact that essentially everything in Appalachian culture, especially, is oral history or oral
yeah,
instruction or things like that.
right,
And
right.
so mouthwork is essentially your history, your day-to-day life, your
Yeah,
your future and everything. And it seemed to me quite striking from that angle. Is it's kind of like, I think that's actually very insightful.
I was very interested in your story about him being a whistleblower, and
yeah,
you're also writing a book about that. Do you
right,
want to
right.
tell our audience of, I think we're up to about 8.98 million?
Just in the last day.
That's true. That's true. We've gained 100,000 listeners in the last day. They were very
Wow.
excited to hear you. Don't take anything I say seriously. I write fiction.
And each of them send me $1. Is that the case?
Well, if they'd send me $1, I'll split it with you.
All right,
I,
fair enough. Fair enough.
I could advertise. We have our wonderful Books and Brews mug. So if you could all go buy that, please,
Yes.
then we can feed our sheep. But
Well,
yeah, tell us
but
about
about the
your
story.
book.
Well, I'm publishing it as I write. I'm putting it on my website, the first draft as I write it. So it's on my website is jsabsherpoetry.com, and the under works in progress, I think I've got 6 parts now. Very rough draft, and it's repetitive and even kind of contradictory, because as I think of stuff, I'm realizing, well, no, that's what I put earlier is not really true, and I'm not always at this point going back and correcting it, because once I'm hoping this will be about 50,000 words and publishable, but I want it to be good, even if it's only shared among family.
Right,
And it's so the story. My father was emotionally abused as a child by his father, and beat too. But in those days, the beatings were so common by fathers. I don't know that he thought that as excessive, but the verbal and emotional, I think, was tough on him. He was abusive to my grandmother, my father's mother, also, and she had many episodes of being hospitalized in a mental hospital.
Oh boy.
The most traumatic was when my dad was quite young, and I don't know how long she was actually gone, but to him, he never really got her back after that hospital stay. When she came back, she was different, and he never really got the mama he remembered back. So that was something that haunted him. It's there was a, and I don't want to shock people. I guess it's common enough, but my grandfather probably sexually abused his only daughter, who left home quite early. And my father, unfortunately, passed that legacy of abuse down to my sister,
Oh, I'm
which
sorry.
I didn't even know till 2006 when I was grown. And my sister and I met at a North Carolina Art Museum, and she told me, and she had just had an article that was coming out under a pseudonym in a book edited by Marlo Thomas.
Oh, wow.
And she did it as a pseudonym, not because she was ashamed for herself, but she didn't want other people to, feel bad about it, family really. But she shared this story with everyone except my mother, who was always, and still, my mom's always 91 and never has really come to grips with that. And I don't know that at 91, that's something you can come to grips with, really.
And
But
I'm not sure what the point is.
well, exactly. There's not a damn thing anyone can do now other than,
Yeah, right.
not be part of the legacy of passing it down.
Right.
But that gave my sister a tough life. And she appreciates my writing about it. She
I
finds
was
it
curious,
validating.
given that you're also
Oh,
talking about the whistleblowing, and that was, I mean, obviously that's had a huge impact on
right,
your father, who
right,
ended up
right,
committing suicide,
right, right.
obviously on your family. I mean, that obviously never goes away. Are you writing this book in part just hoping it will do any good for some of the whistleblowing going on today and the people facing that decision today?
Well, I mean, that would be a worthy, and maybe rewriting it, I'll think about it. Now, I'm more thinking about it. No one in the family other than me knows all, well, I don't know all my sister's story, but I know as much as, as much as she's been willing to share. But my wife and I, several years ago, went to the Forsyth County Library and went through hundreds of newspaper articles and printed them out around that scandal my dad was involved in. And since then, with newspapers.com, I've been able to find a lot more. And one guy was involved in actually wrote a book where he talks about it. Not that he knew my dad, but the whistleblowing came about. The bank was a prominent bank in the mostly rural part of the state, but it was the fourth largest bank in the state. This is back before all the banks became just one big financial blob, right? But they were
Mhm.
more banks. And so it turns out, make a somewhat complex story short, the bank came from Sparta, North Carolina, and it was a merger in 1937 of four small rural banks. And the guy that was present at the creation, he was started out executive vice president and was that from 37 until 58, and then he became president of the and stayed president or chair or president of the holding company until he died in 73. He kind of ran it like his personal fiefdom and did all kinds of things that were not discovered until after he died. And his son, who took over for him, unfortunately continued the tradition. So it's a combination of really kind of country bank practices shading over into shady practices. It's not very artful.
And corruption, right?
Right.
Corruption, right? Hiding stuff from the board and from shareholders and from regulators. Combine that with a crony culture. So the men, the father and son who ran the bank, surround themselves with friends from childhood and relations, and so they created a sort of a coterie of people loyal to them who would do things for them out of loyalty to them that were not on the up and up. So what my dad blew the whistle on, and it kind of just was the little boy taking his thumb out of the dam. So in the same year as the White House plumbers broke into the psychiatrist's office of Daniel Ellsberg, Ellsberg was the whistleblower, and the Nixon administration was trying to get dirt on him. So the White House plumbers, that is kind of a spy unit, broke into the office of his psychiatrist, September 71, and that was kind of the beginning of Watergate, even though we didn't hear
Okay.
about it for a long time after that. That's the very same month that my dad, at the behest of his employers, planted a bug in the office in the bank that the IRS was using to conduct an audit.
Oh, boy.
And it wrecked him. Now, apparently no one else in the bank minded it. Apparently it was broadly known and kind of a big joke. And, obviously they didn't tell the IRS, we're bugging you, but it really upset my dad. And he had underlying issues, I think unresolved guilt about my sister, I'm sure, because he never really faced that. I mean, he quit doing it when she demanded that he quit. That's somewhat to his credit, obviously, but he never really worked through that in any way that I'm aware of. So I think and he was kind of unstable in some ways anyway. So that just kind of wrecked him. And that's also just 2 months before I went on my mission to France, and I had no clue that all this was going on. So anyway, the old man that ran the bank died. His son takes over, and then everyone was afraid of the old man, but they're not afraid of the son. They're the same age or older, and he's a much less domineering type of person. And I probably met him sometime. I don't remember. I remember meeting the old man. I really don't remember ever meeting him, but I think he was just kind of sloppy. So anyway, the bank did an investigation and sent it to the FDIC, and the SEC, who sent it to the FBI, listing out all these things that mostly the older man had done, but also the younger, right? Who at the time, he's president of the holding company at this time,
Right.
and they sent it to the FBI. So I think it's probably March of 1977. A swarm of FBI agents settled down on little town of 4,000 people, North Wilkesboro, right? And
Wow.
there's probably an FBI agent for every 100 inhabitants, right? And so they do this, and they take over a conference room in the bank. And my mom told my dad he needed to say something because the bank had a history of bugging. No, beyond just bugging the IRS, it was more than that. But that was the most illegal thing they've done up to that point. So my dad then went to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, if you tell the complete and absolute truth, I will represent you without charge.
Mhm.
And then they went, I think who they went to was one of the original IRS auditors, investigators that my dad knew. But they might have gone to the FBI, at least at some point it gets to the FBI. And my dad says, you know, back in 71, I planted a bug on the IRS, and I'm willing to bet anything that if you scan the conference room that the FBI is using in the bank headquarters, you'll find a bug. And bingo, they did.
Yes.
It was in the phone back in the old phone like this, right? It was in the receiver, right, in the
Old
speaker
school.
of the
That's an amazing story, and I do hope people will
Yeah.
go to your site and look
Yeah.
at that. We probably need to move on to cocktail or mocktail.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Number 3. Yeah. So, what is our third cocktail?
Our third drink is actually called a white peach, and I was inspired by one of the stanzas of the third reading, which actually spoke to a white peach. And white peaches, of course, are marvelously sublime summer fruit, not necessarily as peachy as like a yellow cling peach or a freestone, but it makes a nice backdrop for a drink. And so we have a number of neat ingredients to be able to put into that. So I first start with some blended white peach, which, because white peaches aren't exactly fresh at this time of year, I found some in the freezer section and blended them so they make a nice little bit of a slush because we were still a little bit frozen going into the blender. We then put in just a teaspoon of freshly squeezed, of course, we don't like any other kind, of lemon juice, just to give it a little bit of a kick. Then we have some simple syrup. This helps to even out the flavor with a little bit of sweetness. And if we were to make an alcoholic version of this cocktail, we would use some Prosecco to provide a little bit of that vim and sparkle that you would get from a summer drink. But here what we have is some peach nectarine sparkling water. And this will give us the sparkle without the alcohol. And with that, I'll put a couple of ice cubes in to give it that summer chill. It's nice to have on the front porch after a busy day. And I will give this a bit of a stir. Here we have the white peach.
Cheers.
To a summer cocktail, no, mocktail.
Mocktail, yeah. That has that same kind of what you call sparkle zing that the other one does, but I think I like the flavors of this one better. And this would also, yes, as you say, a wonderful on a hot day.
Okay.
Cheers.
That was so delicious, by the way. It's so delicious.
We are ready for reading number 3.
Okay. So this is based, last year I built a freestanding rock wall in our front yard just because I wanted to do something outside that required a little heavy work, a little bit. You know?
You can come to our place anytime.
We need freestanding walls all over the place.
We need heavy
Well,
work.
yeah, I'm a rank.
Once again, we'll take one for the team. We'll let you do our heavy work.
That is so sweet. I'll take that under.
I'm
I'll
nothing
take
if
that.
not
I'll take
sweet.
that under advisement. All right. But anyway, this poem was inspired by that experience, and it was really a lot of fun. And I wish I had a place to do another one. Calendar years. I'm building a wall, 9.5 foot long, 2 foot wide, high as a 5-gallon bucket. 2 tons or more of unshaped field stones, some bearing the lichen they grew where once they lay, minding no business. They dreamed whatever enchants stones to their place. Until a dozer woke them, a truck moved them. They were palletized, sold, and delivered, and now they enter my dreams. The wall encloses and keeps out nothing. Marks no boundary, adjoins no neighbor. In a few days, when the last stone has been set, the calendar of the wall will start. Ab muro condito, from the founding of the wall, AMC. By year 2, I will have planted native perennials around it and placed potted plants on top. I cannot foresee year 3, nor year X when it will collapse, nor year X plus or minus Y when it will have passed from my view. In year 1 of the great loneliness after the separation, when I hid in shame from any who might have helped, not least God. I walk the neighborhood in circles saying, I won't forget how it feels. I will always remember the pain of loneliness. The resolution gave me comfort. This continued to year 10, when meeting Patty reset the calendar. Now it's year 23 of the reset, year 21 of my business debacle and the first gray hair, year 40 of my son, year 46 of my father's suicide, year 72 of my arrival on this slowly decaying orbiter, and so on and so forth, neither ad infinitum nor diminuendo. 11 years since I returned to you. I'm building a wall of unhewn stone. About 10 years since unexpectedly you drew near, almost palpably, like the warmth of the beloved's body lying close but not touching. 9 years since we entered, Patty and I, a mirrored room and knelt at the altar. I've displaced wrigglers and yellow and black millipedes, disrupted the nurseries of ants and the hidey holes of roly-polies, but only temporarily. I built in the light rain while toads hopped to escape my feet, and a tiny spider, pale as the flesh of a white peach, scurried to avoid my eye. I'm not sorry. I'm making them a high-rise. I lift and turn each stone, try to register sides and surfaces, the angles, the layering and colors, the variable thickness, the randomness of the world that I presume to order on a small scale to stand up against gravity and time temporarily, till time and gravity take it down, unhouse again pillbug and spider, and return the stones to their dreams. I remember the stone on which the body of the Lord was laid for his anointing. It bore the weight he had borne, a stress my wall could not withstand and I cannot imagine.
What inspired you to use the imagery of building a wall to talk about our lives in the way you did and the years passing?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's fascinating the way a
Right,
poet's or a writer's mind works.
Right. So I don't think that was planned necessarily. So it's the poems in sections. I think it just kind of happened. So the little probably pedantic joke that no one will get. The Rome years were counted AUC, ab urbe condito, from the founding of the city. So I thought, from the founding of the wall, little inside pedantic joke here that, if Julius Caesar gets resurrected, he might recognize that's a little joke, right? And I think that generated the thought, well, everything has a time. Everything has a time, right? The wall will have years, but then there are years I can't foresee. Now, when I got to think about my own past, I don't exactly know, other than as I was working on the wall, a lot of time for introspection. Which, when you're working with your hands, introspection is not as negative or circular or self-involving as if you're just sitting by yourself in a dark room doing it, right? Somehow the energies work better, I think, when you're doing something with your hands and let your mind just work. And I think that's just what happened. So I got to, well, what is the calendars in my life? Well, the separation and divorce, the meeting Patty in the 10th year, that reset the calendar, and that was 23 years ago last year. We just celebrated the 24th anniversary of our meeting on February 5th.
Congratulations.
And then the kind of a jokey, well, not all jokey, but the year of my gray hair. Yeah, that's kind of a joke. The year of my business debacle. Only a few people know what that means, but it was traumatic. My son was 40, turned 40 last year. My father had been dead 46 years, and then I was 72. So I got thinking, I said earlier, I like poetry that deals with time and the passage of time and mortality. This is kind of that. And then the next section by itself is kind of my return to the Savior, and it's one of the more spiritual experiences I've ever had. And the last section, I guess, is just trying to sum up what building the wall makes a tiny disruption, but not much in nature. But it will only be there a short time, and then nature will take over again.
again. One of the things I like about poetry, and this is true of prose, but not to the same extent, I think, is that I think poetry lends itself to people kind of seeing their own meanings in it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so when I first read this, I was kind of like, wait, we just jumped from a wall to the various years. But as you read it this time, what occurred to me was all these events of our lives build a life stone by stone,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like you are. And so I didn't know if that's what your answer would be, because that's what I suddenly saw in it. I did want to ask you, a couple of your other projects are very interesting. You annotated a book about Ida Crumpler Beard, and that led you to writing about Jim Crow. What brought you to Ida Crumpler Beard in the first place? And if you want to tell the audience who she is.
Well, all right. She was obscure, not well-educated young woman, mother by the time she wrote her book. Lived in Winston-Salem. That's when they were actually called Winston and Salem, but they were so close together that people talked about them still already as the Twin Cities. She wrote a book. Her husband abandoned her and her two kids. I think the kids were like 14 and 11 or something, and she had no way to make a living. So she decided she'd write a book, publish it herself, market it herself, and that's The Deserted Wife, My Own Life or a Deserted Wife. And the book is partly just revenge porn about all the horrible stuff her husband did and how she fought back. You can't say it's well written, but it is pretty honestly written, and it includes an amazing number of people and places and institutions in Winston-Salem. She got married in 1880. She's writing the book in 1898. So that time period, if you're interested in Winston-Salem at all, or small towns in a small industrializing town in the Upper South, it's kind of interesting that way. But mostly it's seeing her wrestle with her issue. And then one of the things that happened, which actually for us is a plus in her husband's side and very deeply negative on her side. In 1895, and this is again another complicated story, and I won't try to tell it all. A young man was in prison for killing a police officer. A young black man was in jail, not prison, was in local jail for killing a police officer. And there was a long backstory, and so you could sympathize with the kid to some extent, why he did what he did. And it also seemed like probably the policeman, on the very morning or afternoon when they got in a tussle with him, the policeman who had killed his brother was acquitted. So clearly he was in no mood to be messed with by police. And they shouldn't have messed with him, but they did.
So just to clarify, the
Right.
cop killed the young man's brother, and then
Yes,
the young
and
man
then was tried. Now, and for him to even be indicted was quite amazing at the time. For a white officer to be indicted for murdering a African American man was kind of a big deal in and of itself. But he was acquitted despite pretty good testimony that the killing was unprovoked. It was not justified by the circumstances. So that morning, that police officer is acquitted. The afternoon, the couple policemen push around his brother a little bit. Shouldn't have done it. I mean, just out of pure native common sense, don't mess with someone who's mad, right?
First humanity, really.
I just don't do it. But they did. And so a gun fell out and probably the young man had it. He picked it up and shot, and one of the young policemen died. So there was fear there would be a lynching. So he was moved to First Greensboro, which even then was not very far. There was a direct train link from Winston-Salem to Greensboro, not really far. It would have been easy for lynchers to go there. So then they moved him to Charlotte, which in those days was harder to get to. The defense wanted to change the venue, but it was turned down. And the judge later said probably that would have been a good idea. So he was brought back the week, in a Sunday in August or Monday in August. I think jury selection finishes Friday. They start the trial Friday or Saturday. The trial adjourns for Sunday. Arthur Tuttle is the name of the young man who's been jailed, angry over the death of his brother Walter. and the acquittal. So Arthur Tuttle's in jail. He's, I think, 18 or 19. And the rumor goes around town, white and black communities, that there's going to be a lynching attempted. Now, we know it's in the black community because Arthur Tuttle's brother went to a church and said, y'all need to come and surround the church and guard it because there's going to be a lynching. And I know it was in the white community because her husband told, he was a justice of the peace or an assistant to a justice of the peace.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
He told her that there was going to be a lynching attempt. And this is interesting, he sided with Tuttle, which the young black man, which just shocked no end his wife, who thought that was horrible. You would,
And that's fascinating because he's
right.
the bad guy in her book.
He's the bad guy in the book, but in this case, I have to say, we kind of root for him, right? Yeah, he did the right thing. He was trying to do the right thing. I don't think he was very effective at it, but then it would have been hard. But the thing is, it's not clear that a lynching was actually attempted. What happened was it's hard to know how many, as many as 300, mostly men, almost all, if not entirely black men, surrounded the jail armed, or they guarded the jail. And the Forsyth Rifles, the local militia, and armed sheriff deputies came up. Someone fired a shot, of course, and then everyone starts shooting freely. None of the deputies or militia were killed. Some were injured slightly.
That's very fortunate with guns going off all over.
Yeah,
the place.
and unknown, and the black community really hid what happened to theirs. So it's probable that some were wounded. We know for sure. We know only the one person by name who it was. Don't remember it right now. But there was probably some people killed as well, but that was all hidden. So the white community never actually knew what happened. So that's how I found out about that story. And what I really became interested in was of the 300 people or so that were guarding the jail, about 50 were arrested, and we know them by name. So what I've been doing on and off, and it's been on for a while I'm working on the other book, but what I've been doing is trying to document who they were and what their lives were like before and after. So, and
that sounds like a fascinating book. I would
Right.
like to ask
Sure.
for our audience, I'm guessing that history is not being terribly well taught in schools these days. Can you talk a little bit about what Jim Crow was?
Well, yeah, Jim Crow was a regime of white supremacy that was established in the South. And after Reconstruction, I think 1890 is when in Mississippi, blacks were denied the franchise. I think it was in 1890. Slowly, the Supreme Court allowed public accommodations, particularly railroads, to be segregated.
Mm-hmm.
So by the late 19th century, and kind of Jim Crow and white supremacy and the laws barring African Americans from voting and participating in public life and from doing many things, those laws kind of started in the Deep South and just kind of crept north.
Okay.
So they really got codified in North Carolina with the Constitutional Amendment in 1900. So just shortly after this happened.
Okay.
And the amendment also disenfranchised a bunch of poor whites as well as blacks. But it was a constitutional amendment that was passed just with the votes of the legislature, not with popular vote, because it would probably been beaten. Because one of the great things that happened, and this is totally forgotten, is that the populists in the Democratic Party got fed up with the Democratic establishment. And they made a coalition with Republicans, which were mostly an African American party, not entirely, but mostly. They did a coalition that their enemies called the Fusion, but that's kind of what it's called. And they won a bunch of statewide and congressional races in a couple of elections, and they were kind of endangering the white Democratic establishment. And so they unleashed all kinds of racist hell throughout the state. Riots and kind of a little bit of a Ku Klux Klan sort of thing. And the culmination was the coup d'etat in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, I believe it was, which has been very much written about. But that was kind of the climax of that campaign. And that was a town that was basically run by African-American elected office holders. And they
in
were
1898.
Yeah, but they were run out of town or worse. And so became a bastion of white supremacy. Wilmington did. And I've not really deeply studied that. Lots of people have that painful story.
So we need to wrap up. So can you tell our audience where they can find you online?
Primarily my website, jsabsherpoetry.com. All one word, JSA Poetry.
And Laura, where can we find you?
You can find me at lauravosica.com. And that's kind of, if you look me up, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, all of those places. Michael, my normal co-host, as opposed to my abnormal co-host. Michael.
Hey, she married me. So
oh no. Michael can be found at aperfectpint.net. Michael and I together are at booksandbrews.net, and we're also on Instagram as Book and Brews, and we're on Facebook as facebook.com/booksandbrews with Laura Vosica and michaelagnew.com or something like that.
and Laura, what are your upcoming
Right.
events? Or our upcoming
Yeah,
events?
ours. Well, number one, Gabriel's Horn is accepting submissions for our 2023 anthology, because we're time travelers, which is music, and also for 2024, which is faith. The last 6 months of 2023 were
A
utter
little busy.
disaster. So I will be putting out 2023 a year late. We will also be on April 13th and also in June and July was second Saturday, I think, at the Morristown Farmers Market in Morristown, Tennessee. And
Who is our guest next month, Laura?
so next month, I am looking forward to, I wanted to mention this is National Poetry Month. So that's why Stan is here in April.
Happy National Poetry
Yeah,
Month, both
yeah.
of you.
So next month we have Manswell T. Peterson, and he has endured many challenges in his life. He decided to put those experiences to good use by writing as an adult. In 2007, he debuted with the eye-opener, Am I a Priority in Your Life or an Option? It's a novel that provides an inside look on the male perspective of juggling women. That should be interesting. His latest creations are entirely different. They are paranormal fantasy series centered on the Lacrotum universe. Hopefully I said that right. The first 11 books have been published, and Manswell has also created 2 other young adult series, Lacrotum Academy and the Charmcasters series. He is married to his lovely wife, Dr. LaTanya Peterson. He has 2 sons. Manswell is a disabled Navy veteran and a proud member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. So I think that's the end. This has been